Alrighty folks, so welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about all these items in the fight tab and I'm going to be ranking them. First things first, let's go with Walter's slingshot because it's bothering me that it is out here and not with the rest of the items. So we'll put Walter's slingshot up in B tier because it's useful in quite a few situations, but not every situation because it fires kind of slow and the ammo compared to a melee weapon can get kind of expensive, although compared to other ranged weapons it's very cheap and it can be used for a couple things like killing birds and some general things like that very nicely just at most times. Next up we got the spear. Spear's also going in B tier because you can use it to make ice staves mostly, and also there is a small gap of time where it is useful if you're playing as Wickerbottom, and it can also be useful if you just find one next to a boon, which is actually pretty common. So I will say that it's going in B tier. Next up we got the Hambat. Hambat obviously going S tier. So Hambat has infinite uses for 10 days. It does a lot of damage for how cheap it is, and basically it's just the best general use weapon for all times. The only weapon that really can rival it is the Dark Sword, which is a little bit later game and it has less uses but it does more damage, and it also hurts your sanity. So they kind of trade blows back and forth, but Hambat is usually the best general weapon. Next up we got the grass suit, straight to F tier. So the grass suit doesn't protect you much, it costs too much, it has low durability, just wouldn't recommend it, completely skip it. Next up we got the log suit, also going straight to F tier. So the log suit, it's basically like the football helmet except worse in every way. So it costs too much. It goes in the body slot, which is better used for a backpack most of the time, or you could swap it for a Magiluminescence amulet in later game if you're a better player and you are going to the ruins. And generally it's just better to use the helmet slot for protection if at all possible, and football helmets are actually cheaper. So generally it's just outclassed with a football helmet at every turn, which just throws it straight down to F tier because it can't compete. So Marble suit, we'll throw Marble suit in C tier. So it's not useful many times, but generally if you're going to tank a boss, it could potentially be useful because its damage resistance is just so high. Now it will slow you down, so it's just for tanking. You don't want to kite in this thing because that would be very difficult, but for certain bosses, tanking them can be situationally good in a very few circumstances. Generally, this is a better item for newer players who are struggling to, kite boss. Football helmet, another item that just goes straight into S tier. This is the best general armor. Doesn't cost very much. Costs 1 pigskin, 1 rope. So generally, it goes very, very well in just with almost everything. It's not situational at all. So basically, I'll wear this almost all the time except for when I need an umbrella in spring to get rid of the water. So yeah, generally just football helmet, high damage resistance, cheap, very, very good armor item. We got electric darts. Technically these are farmable, but they're not as good as regular blow darts if you're farming them. So we're gonna put them down in D tier because they're not technically useless, but they're so close to useless. They're trying. Okay, next up we got blow darts. We're putting these in C tier. So in very, very late game with Wickerbottom, you can farm these if you have a couple of reeds close by. Normally you want a reed trap set piece if you're gonna mega base on a Wickerbottom world, and these deal the most damage per second out of any weapon in the entire game if you have just stacks and stacks of them. They're not actually technically efficient to use because you'll still be wasting time by making them because they're pretty expensive, even though they deal ridiculous damage and it's kind of fun to use them, and even though Wickerbottom can actually farm every single ingredient to make them. Plus, they actually take up a lot of inventory space if you were going to use them as a primary weapon because they only stack up to 20. So generally, they're just not the best weapon, although they can be pretty fun to use if you go to that late game Wickerbottom world type thing. Fire dart, straight to F tier. This is a fire staff, except it only has 1 use, and just the 1 use is basically more expensive than the entire fire staff. That's terrible. Sleeping dart, also going to F tier. So these on certain enemies won't even set them to sleep immediately with just 1 dart, and they're expensive, and I could just use the free pan flute that spawns next to the Glommer statue instead, which is also easier to use. So I would never use them. Not a good item. Boomerang. We're gonna put Boomerang in C tier. It's not a great item, but it can be used for a couple situations. Getting a Qualiphant to come after you instead of just running away from you. It's not useful in many situations, and generally the only time you're going to use it is when you find it for free next to a boon, which is actually fairly common. And I'd recommend you pick it up if you see that. Be mine, straight to F tier. You would be better off just collecting the bees and dropping them if you needed them for something. I know there's a couple bosses that can be cheesed that way, and that would basically be the use case for that, but bee mines just make it more expensive and they're unnecessary. So, Gale Mail, if you were to use this in PvP, you were just trying to fight someone, this would go straight up to S tier, but I know no one plays PvP anymore. That's kind of not a thing because Don't Starve PvP is bad. So we're just going to put it down in F tier because what happens is, while this gives you 100% immunity to fire, which is cool, and I would bet there's probably like 1 or 2 farms out there that make like some niche use out of this. I haven't seen any in a long time in Don't Starve Together. But basically, if an enemy attacks you while you wear this, it will set them on fire, which sounds cool in theory, except the thing is, fire spreads from enemies that are on fire in Don't Starve Together, so you're gonna just burn down an entire forest with this thing if you wear it. Would not recommend. Also, it's quite expensive. Toothtrap. Oh, Toothtrap. Okay, so here's the thing. Toothtraps, new players generally like Toothtraps because they don't really have to do much. I am going to put this down in D tier because it does have a couple uses. They are quite expensive though for what they do, and you have to reset them after every use. And for killing hounds, it doesn't work the same way as it does in the original Don't Starve, where they all come at once. They come like one at a time, but one every like half second or so. The trick is to just kill them very quickly with strong weapon and armor, like the Hambat and football helmet, and you'll be perfectly fine. And you don't really need to make these. These are kind of just a waste of time. But if you're a very, very new player, it might work for you. Weather Pane, we're gonna put this up in B tier. It is great for the Ancient Fuel Weaver fight. It's quite expensive, so technically it's not an efficient item because it would just be faster to kill him without it, but killing him without it is very, very difficult, especially if you don't have other crazy gear. And yeah, this just makes it way, way easier because otherwise he heals so much. Very useful in that situation, and it has a couple other situations where it's useful, so I'll just leave that in B tier. Morning Star. This is another weapon that technically does a lot of damage, but it's so situational. So I am going to put it in C tier, mostly because it's extremely expensive. If it was cheaper, I would definitely recommend it more often, but it's very, very expensive and hard to gather the materials for it. But it deals more damage than a Dark Sword if the enemy is wet. The issue with that is that not all enemies can get wet, so it's not exactly useful in many circumstances. There are a couple enemies it is useful against though, and it does give off light if I remember correctly. I just don't use this item much. It's too expensive. Battle Spear. We'll put Battle Spear in C tier. Basically the issue with Battle Spear is there's better weapons available. It's really the true issue here. The Hambat exists and does way, way more damage, and the Battle Spear, basically the only one you're ever going to want to use is that first one you spawn in with. So that one is great to use until you get a better weapon like a Hambat. Other than that, I wouldn't use it. The Battle Helm, this goes right up to S tier. Now, they're cheap, they have more durability than football helmets, they deal the same damage resistance as the football helmet. The only real issue with this is that you gotta go Wigford to make them. The thing is, we got character swapping now, so that's not really a big deal. So, Cookie Cutter Cap. This is more expensive than a football helmet, and worse than a football helmet stats-wise, so we're just gonna put it down in F tier. Knapsack. Okay, this is another item that will be going in F tier. It can be used to dupe Shroomskin, but you have to kill Misery Toadstool to be able to make this item. Now, Shroomskin isn't very useful for anything at all. Basically, it's just like decoration for Mega Basers. Yeah, and after I release this video, like always happens, they'll probably remove the dupe you can use for Shroomskin with the deconstruction staff. That's probably not supposed to be in the game. Also, Klee, if you're watching this, the scaled flooring still does that. So, we got the Tail 03 Cats, I think it's called. This is another item that was meant for PvP. So what it does is it's actually a little bit longer range melee weapon. It is extremely expensive and hard to craft, so that's the reason why I'm putting it down in F tier. If it was a lot cheaper, I could definitely see some uses for it with that longer range. It's just so expensive is the issue, really. So I have to put it down in F tier because there's no time where you would actually use this in normal play. Alrighty, and that's it. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more.